Curious about how the Indian state really works, its levers of power, tech ambitions, and geopolitical maneuvers, explore it all through one of three specializations in our 12-week graduate certificate in public policy. Applications close August 24th.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, folks. In this All Things Policy episode, we are going to discuss tariffs. I'm sure some of you could guess that this episode was coming. To talk about tariffs and what is happening in the world today, we have Anisree in the studio. Anisree Suresh is a research associate with the Takshashila Institution. She works on the issues around geoeconomics. And so this is her, she's having a grand time researching and talking about and tracking all of the constant developments happening in this sector, courtesy Mr. Donald Trump. I am Ashwin Prasad. I am also a research analyst with the Takshashila Institution. Welcome, Anisree. How are you today?
Oh, thank you, Ashwin. I don't know whether I should say super excited or like super sad. In this context that I think we have to state that at the time of recording, Trumps have signed an executive order announcing that India will face an extra 25% above the already existing 25% tariffs. So that's where we are right now. So
a few days ago, we wouldn't have guessed that, even a couple of weeks ago, that this was coming. But now we have 2 layers of tariffs that has been imposed, and so does the rest of the world. Europe, we are not alone in this imposition of tariffs from the US. So let us start from the start. What is the reasoning, or what is the intention behind the US imposing tariffs on all of its trade partners in the world?
Okay. So that's mainly, I think, even in the first term of Trump itself, you could see that there's a lot of these protectionism tendencies has been emerging. There were a bit of tariff war that was going on since the Trump first term as well. And in the Biden, some of these things were reduced and some continued, especially with China and everything. And in the second term, since the beginning itself, we have a lot of a range of tariffs on sector specifics and country specific as well. So we know the Liberation Day, April 2nd tariffs and everything, where Trump came out with a very big box of tariffs to each countries and everything. So now we are in the second stage of that. I mean, actually the third stage of that. After that, we had the 90-day pause where, the Trump said that, okay, this is a period for you to come and negotiate your trade deals with me, convince me that US should do a trade deal with you. So now that period also ended by July 9th, that 90-day pause ended, and he extended the date till August 1st. And now by end of July, he came out and said that, okay, this is 25% will be the tariff for India because despite 5 rounds of negotiations, we were not able to conclude a trade deal. There were a lot of contentions on areas like agriculture and dairy products and all those things, and US market entry into that. And now the major contention is the India buying Russian import. So that's a major contention now. So with that, the latest update is that 25% tariff on all Indian exports to the US and an additional 25% because India is buying Russian oil. And in his words, we are supporting the Russian war in the Ukraine-Russian war. Yeah.
That is okay. That is a great.
So that's a bit of a scenario, I know, right? So there are multiple reasons behind this frustration, right? If you want to look at that part of the question. So, however, if you look at it, when he came into power on the second term, he announced that he would stop the Ukraine-Russia war in 24 hours. But we know that nothing happened. And if you look at all the China, Russia, India, all those RIC countries who are continue trading with Russia, even EU is doing. EU buys a lot of LNG gas from Russia even now. And Russia is already in a war. So Trump is not able to do much about it, and so he wants to stop it through some means, right? And he tried with China. And he imposed initially 145% tariffs on China, and China imposed much larger tariff on US as well. And China has the semiconductor, all those things. So there's some kind of leverage that China is having. And now so he figured it out that maybe China is not the person that you can actually target much at this point. And then he turns to India. And then there's a lot of other reasons as well. Like, we had the 5 rounds of negotiations, nothing happened. That impatience is coming up. And even in the Pahalgam issue and, India denying that we didn't ask for Trump's negotiations or mediation in the issue with the Pakistan and everything. So there's a lot of all these clashes that was happening in the last few weeks that led to the point that Trump is really frustrated with India.
Wow, okay. There is a ongoing trade negotiation between the two countries for a trade deal, which is also being delayed as per what you're saying.
Yeah.
Here's a question which might be a slight detour from the topic, but I want to ask it nonetheless. You all often hear the narrative in India that this is a good chance for us to have reforms in our own economy and in our own economic setup, so that we hit 2 birds with 1 stone. One, we improve our own efficiency, competitiveness, and all of that, and 2, we can push the trade deal forward.
Yes.
What do you think about this?
See, initially, it was a really great opportunity for India, like we had in the 1990s, to liberalize our sectors, push the reforms, and so that we can take off, right? So India as a country traditionally been we still have higher tariffs and non-tariff barriers. Although we did try to liberalize a lot of this in the 1990s, a lot of still continues. And even if you're looking at the trade with the US itself, for example, some of the non-tariff barriers that I can think of right now is one, we don't allow any kind of GM crops into India. So there's a lot of religious sensitivity and unscientific mindset behind it. So I don't want to get into that discussion much, but we don't allow GM crops. So that mainly and soybeans is one of the huge export of US. So that itself, there is a clash, right? Second is we don't allow livestock products from the US which are fed meat feed. So that means any of the dairy products, all those things are completely blocked. And that's also one of the huge sector that US is really trying to push to get market access in India. So you all have these issues already that's been placed, and India has higher tariffs. We have, even if you're looking at just the agriculture sector, it's 39%. It's quite higher than other countries, right? So that's all there. But the problem right now is even until yesterday, I would have said that we should still push for a interim trade deal and see continue negotiations and everything. And even now we should continue negotiations. But the problem is if you're looking at Trump's strategy, so in the first term, he signed the USMCA deal with Mexico and Canada. And after 5 years, he came back into power and said that that deal means nothing, right? So that unpredictability is never a good option for any business, any country, so your supply chains and everything, you can't change it overnight. So that has to have that kind of process and everything. So that means right now it's a bit riskier. So even if we say that, okay, we'll stop importing oil from Russia, we'll reduce that, we'll diversify, and we will buy some other weapons and oil from the US as well, and open up all our sectors at 0 tariffs, and probably you would get a tariff rate of 15% because that's a new 0 for Trump. So that means Indian exports to US probably would face a 15-20% scenario, and still you don't know what's he gonna ask next, right? So that's unpredictability is never a good environment for any trade to happen. So that will be a huge problem. And second aspect is the Russian oil aspect itself. So right now, Russia is a source of 35 to 45% of India's oil imports. And it's that kind of a strategy comes from economic pragmatism and strategic realism for India, so that it's cheap oil, and the US has already put a price cap on the Russian oil, and we have been following that. And now he's saying that we are making a lot of money because of that, because we refine it and send it back to the global economy. However, if we stop that, India's oil prices will go up. So that will have a lot of impact on the domestic manufacturing and the higher prices for consumers and everything. And it would be also politically damaging for Mr. Modi's government, right? So that all problems would be definitely there. So considering all these things, I think it would be better for India to continue negotiations. And I think one thing I have to give it here, there are two things we have to note here. One, lowering tariffs is really important and is beneficial for India no matter what. However, in this scenario, when Trump is asking India to open up its agriculture sector, you also have to see that it's not very mutually convenient because US agriculture sector is highly subsidized. So that's not a fair condition for Indian trade either, right? And also, he is talking about, all the US imports will have 0% tariff and all the Indian exports will have 15 or 20% tariff, which is also not a fair condition. So that means that fairness of trade is missing in these deals. However, I think I still feel like we should continue negotiating and to see how it's going. Maybe we should not rush into a trade deal as of now because of let's see what Trump is going to do with the China. They probably have a deal coming probably in August itself. So let's see what's going to happen to that. And once that's said, let's see how we can place ourselves in a much more higher place where we can actually leverage and negotiate much higher place. Yeah.
So, in your opinion, do you think a reciprocal trade deal is something that would satisfy both governments and countries and would make economic and political sense? So, let's just, for the sake of the discussion, say a uniform 15 to 20% tariff rate by both countries across all the sectors where there is a lot of contention right now.
In an ideal situation, and consider Trump is not the leader of Washington, then in that case, I would say lower it as down as 0%.
Okay.
That's the best beneficial scenario because when you have lower import tariffs, that means competition, higher innovation, your economy will take off, and that's a lot of benefits comes from that. And you get market access to each other country, right? But only in this scenario, and you're dealing with a very unpredictable leader, this is getting a little trickier.
Okay, so the ideal would be that both countries actually have a free trade agreement with 0% tariffs across the board.
Yeah.
Therefore, reaping all the...
And if you're looking at the India-UK FTA that we recently signed and everything, so there will be certain sectors that we would still hold back. For India's history, all the FTAs that we signed, there are certain agricultural and dairy products that we're this is not the red line for us and we're not going to touch that. Although personally, I feel there are a lot of sectors within that we could actually, slowly see that, whether we can open up and see. However, it's a highly politically sensitive issue for India, and Trump just bullying us to open that won't work. That's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So now, in this scenario, assuming that Trump is not going to he's going to honor his deal with India if we strike one, and that operation of good faith holds. What would you say is a realistic deal that we can?
So at the moment, if you're looking at the deal with Vietnam or one Trump had with Pakistan and UK or EU, so I think UK and EU will be a much more very ideal scenario. I don't think India will be able to get that kind of a deal. So what we're looking at is realistically, if India signs a deal, it's probably could lower to as low as 20%. So that would be 20% still is really, really high, but still India might enjoy some kind of tariff arbitrage when it comes to its competitors like Vietnam and Bangladesh, although they are linked similar lines, but at least you don't lose out much. However, now with the Russian oil is a major issue, that means probably Trump would push India to completely diversify away from Russian oil and everything. I think which will have some of its economic implications as well, because the oil prices will shoot up and all those kind of thing. And it's also India feel that Trump is entering into a restrictive territory of India's foreign policy decisions and everything. And that's what the problem. And also when a fair trade has to happen, you need rule of law. So only when there is rule of law being held at its highest quality, you can ensure that fairness in the trade, right? So right now, WTO is in shambles. You don't have that institution functioning. Despite all these tariffs and everything, we don't see any kind of comment or anything from WTO coming, right? So that rule of law at this moment is missing. So there's quite a lot of discussions about how we should restructure a new environment and everything. But that's very much necessary for free trade to happen and to function smoothly.
Okay. And now that we have this 50% tariffs imposed on us, how is it going to play out? What is the implication for our economy, short term, medium term? What are we...
So, again, right now it's 50%. But yesterday there was also a snide remark by Trump that there are more secondary sanctions coming. He didn't mention the country's name or anything, but it could go up because, you're dealing with a very particular kind of an individual here. That's you haven't seen any kind of these things happening before in history, right? So it's unprecedented. So you really don't know what you're dealing with. And when it comes to Trump, nobody knows anything. That's a motto. So right now, the first 25% that was imposed, that is effective from August 7th, as we are recording from today. And the newly announced 24% will come into place 21 days from now. That's probably towards the end of the August, you might have that too. But that's also a period if something happens, he's also gonna change that. So there's no assurity. As of now, it's 50% from by end of August onwards. So main things that's going to go affected by this is jewelry and gems. And then you have textiles, because this is the major areas of exports that we do to US. So these things will be heavily affected. So few items like pharmaceuticals, generic medicine, all those things won't be affected. And steel and aluminum already have separate tariffs. So that's also not going to be affected by this 50%. But I think already it has 50%. So not much of a difference. And so mainly these things will be affected. And one thing you had to see that all the other countries, even Pakistan has only 19% tariff, Vietnam 1920, Philippines 1920, EU, who is also, by the way, importing a lot of LNG gas, is also 15% and all those things. And Australia, already the reciprocal tariffs were at 10%, and 10% is the new zero. So that there's no problem. So only Brazil and India right now have the 50% tariffs. And even China, by the way, who is considered as enemy kind of a thing for US, is at 30% right now. So they have a period until middle of August to see that whether they can negotiate a deal. And I feel China has much more leverage to look at it in a very more fair manner with the US, and China will be probably asking for something much larger than just 15% or 20%. And says that this is only it has to be mutual. So China will probably coming up with a better deal than India. So at the moment, it's India who is losing out. And Brazil also, I think the Brazil's exports to US is also comparatively minimal. So I don't think Brazil is also not that bothered. India Indian economy is quite resilient, although we do export 20% of our exports to the US. So our economy will be affected by 0.2% to 0.5%. We don't know the exact numbers. But definitely our exports to US will be reduced to almost 40-50%. So there will be definite that kind of disruptions happening. And I think almost some estimate shows that $8 billion worth of exports will be really vulnerable to these changes. That's mainly all the jewelry, apparel, textiles and everything. And our IT service, which is our one of the trade surplus areas that are not targeted under the current duties on good.
Okay.
And so that's a good thing as of now. And pharmaceuticals, the investigations are going on. Probably a tariff is coming on that too soon. But as of now, that's also exempted. And
there are some companies like Pegatron or Foxconn or basically Apple trying to diversify from China
Yeah.
and set up manufacturing in India so as to, and I think even the latest iPhone, most of it is actually being manufactured in India is the manufacturer for American users, right?
Yeah.
Will this, do you think this will get an exemption of any sort, or what is
As of now, I don't think it's affected, but I have to cross-check that. But as of now, it's not affected. So the entire service sector, all those things are not affected.
Okay.
However, the problem is like, this is why I think like whenever you're saying that, okay, Trump is a very difficult person to deal with, we also have to see that like, US is a crucial partner for India. Despite all these problems and everything, I'm hoping that in another 2-3 months, things kind of slow down and India should actively negotiate a trade deal with the US. So there are multiple reasons behind this, right? One is that as of now, right now, we have a trade surplus with the US, and that's like very few countries that India has a trade surplus. That means like, US is a huge export market that we could look into, and that's the area something we can develop and see that, okay, this is like, improve our own economy in that. So there's a lot of export opportunities for India. Second is a lot of capital and investment which is like coming from the US, right? So like, most of our FDI is based on all this investment that's coming from the US. So we have to get it back. So that's the only way. And we also have to see that like, right now, India has a benefit of demographic dividend. And if India doesn't take off really well in the next 15-20 years, we're going to miss the best. And then that's a huge problem. Then like, we're having a lower, older population, and that means like our economy might not be able to do as much as it could have done during this period. So that means like we have to get US on our side. And like you mentioned, all the firms that are moving away from China, and to entirely work this China plus strategy out, we do really need US on our side. So that doesn't mean like we should get bullied, but also means like we have to find a leverage and see that like, how to get US on our side. And I think geopolitically, whether Trump realizes or not, India is a very much important partner for the US. So I hope that that kind of an understanding comes back to the Washington's policies and see that like, how we can work with India and see like, how we can work this out. So I think, yeah. And I just want to mention here, I think this is also a very opportunistic moment for India to build amicable relations with China. Like, right now we do have some restrictions on our FDI and everything. And I think this is a time that like, let's bring back all the production and everything. I know it sounds a bit of industrial policy advocate, but I'm saying that if the production is happening elsewhere, why should we like close our doors to it? Like, open it up and see like, how we can bring innovation and competition and everything back home and take off. Because definitely there will be some impact on the economy because of these tariffs and everything. So next step is for us to diversify away from this issue and sign as many free trade agreements with other countries as possible. And and maybe work with China, and eventually we should work with US as well. So right now, even if you're taking a back step, it's fine, but let's wait out and see like, how the US-China deal is going to be, and then come back and work on the relationship.
Well, thanks, Anisree. This is one of those very curious moments in our daily lives where international relations and foreign policy and domestic politics become so deeply intertwined with each other that it's closely linked. And this wouldn't be such a big issue for India if it weren't so deeply linked with the domestic politics that India has to face and BJP has to navigate.
Yes.
And
so I think we say that, right, agriculture and dairy products, that actually dictates our elections in India. So like, whatever that we are doing to open up these sectors or not will definitely have an impact on the domestic politics. And ideally, like in the situation, like Russian oil shouldn't have been an issue for India-US trade relations, specifically to trade relations, in a matter like, you never hyphenate some countries' like foreign policy goals or priorities in a trade deal. The trade deal is specifically for like, what are the sectors that you're opening? What are the market access that I'm getting and all this thing. However, Trump has done that too. Like he has done the impossible. So that means like now India also has to protect its national interest, its strategic autonomy, at the same time, its trade interests. So
yeah. Well, on that note, thanks for joining us for this episode. Anisree, do you have any concluding thoughts?
No, that's all. I'm also like really looking forward to see like how things are going to develop.
Sure.
Let's see. Let's wait and
We'll
see.
track this. If needed, we can think about doing a follow-up in a couple of weeks,
Yeah.
depending on what happens. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.